Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey in Talbot County, Maryland. His mother's name was Harriet, and she was forced to leave her children by the man who owned them. She was hired out to neighboring farms, and her children would stay with her mother until they were several years old. Frederick Douglass was born in 1817 or 1818, and as we have alluded to, he was cared for by his grandmother for the first few years of his life. Isaac and Betsey Bailey were Frederick Douglass's grandparents, and they had several children, all girls. Their names were Jenny, Esther, Millie, Priscilla, and Harriet, who was Frederick's mother. Captain Anthony was the man who owned Betsey Bailey, and therefore all of her children were owned by Captain Anthony, despite the fact that Frederick Douglass's grandfather Isaac was free. Captain Anthony made many of the children who were born to the people he owned stay with Betsey Bailey, who would then care for them for the first few years of their lives, because they were no use to him as workers when they were toddlers or infants. In this way, Betsey Bailey was able to care for her own grandchildren, as she and Isaac had all girls, and several of them had children also, including Harriet. Thus, Frederick Douglass stayed with his grandmother and grandfather for the first few years of his life, while his mother was forced to work as a field hand in an area farm that was some miles away. Now, Captain Anthony was an overseer on Colonel Lloyd's plantation in Maryland. The Lloyds were a well-known family in Maryland. They were among the largest wheat growers and owners of people in the state of Maryland, and Captain Anthony was one of their major overseers. When the children who were being cared for by Frederick Douglass's grandmother were about 5 or 6 years old, Captain Anthony would make her bring them to him where he worked, because he actually lived in a little red house on Colonel Lloyd's plantation. Betsey had to take Frederick to this house when he was about 5 or 6 years old and turn him over to Captain Anthony, who would have him work around the farm and to have him be a playmate for Colonel Lloyd's son. Frederick Douglass was on this new plantation without his mother or his grandparents and with siblings whom he barely knew. Frederick's mother, Harriet, knew where her children were, and she made every effort she could to get to see them. Harriet was forced to work on a plantation that was about 12 miles away from where her children were. She was not allowed, of course, to leave the plantation, but she did anyway. She waited until after the sun went down and walked the 12 miles to the plantation where Frederick and her other children were staying and spent as much time as she could with her children. Frederick remembered that it was not often that he got to see his mother, but when he did see her, those memories were seared into his memory. She would sit with him at times until he fell asleep, and when Frederick would get up, she would be gone. You see, she had to get back to the farm that she escaped from before the sun came up, or it would be discovered that she had left, and she would be severely beaten. So Harriet, Frederick's mom, would walk the 12 miles after the sun went down to go see her children, then turn around and travel back another 12 miles all in the same night. Now, this was a mother's love. It was only a short time before his mother would pass away, and Frederick did not even know it until after she had died. But another remarkable discovery about his mother would impact him for the rest of his life. He found out that she could read. This was an incredible achievement in the eyes of many of the people he knew, because she was the only person who was enslaved who was known to be able to read in that area of Tuckahoe in Talbot County, Maryland. He was fascinated by this information, and he credits this information about his mother as being the motivating factor he had that inspired him to a lifelong love of reading.